On Wednesday, April 19, 1973, police arrested 20-year-old Don James Meyers and 23-year-old Kenneth Evans in the murder of 57-year-old World War II veteran Hollis Voas. Voas was found in his Long Beach townhouse with his hands and feet tied to his blood-soaked bed. The townhouse had been ransacked and his Cadillac had been taken. 6 hours after his body was discovered, police were led to the Compton apartment of Don Meyers, where they found 39 articles of Mr. Voas's possessions, including suits, shirts, trousers, and accessories, in Meyers' bedroom. Later, police would claim that 12 of the items had Mr. Voas's blood spattered on them. The medical examiner said that Voas died from massive injuries inflicted by either hands or feet or a blunt object to his head, chest, stomach, and groin. As a result of the December 1973 grand jury hearing, Meyers was charged with first-degree homicide and set for trial later that December. In his opening statement to the jury, the district attorney told the court, quote, "You will conclude that the defendant sought out an apparent fag, went to Voas's townhouse with the idea of extorting money from him with a story of poverty, playing the part of the little boy lost until Voas let down his guard." He went on, "Meyers then systematically murdered Mr. Voas, stealing his car and looting his home of clothes and cash." Meyers' attorney declined to make an opening statement in his defense. One of the first witnesses was the officer who responded to the call that Mr. Voas's body was found by one of his tenants. The officers told the court that he found Mr. Voas in his blood-spattered bedroom about 11 a.m. on April 18, 1973. He described following a trail of dried blood from the victim's driveway, winding its way through the front door and up the stairs to the bedroom. When the tenant who had found Mr. Voas was on the stand, he was asked if he'd ever seen Meyers before. He replied that he had the day before when the victim and Meyers were unloading building supplies from one of Mr. Voas's rented homes. A detective testified that they were led to Mr. Meyers' Compton apartment by a tip-off. There they found the registration to the victim's Cadillac and his property just 6 hours after the murder. The defendant arrested with Meyers, Kenneth Evans, told the court that Meyers had bragged to him that he had just ripped off a sissy. Evans said that they had abandoned Voas's car when it, quote, blew up. Police said at the same time, Voas was bleeding to death in his townhouse. According to newspaper accounts, when Meyers took the stand on December 12, 1973, throughout his one-hour testimony, he answered almost every question with either "I don't know" or "If that's what you say I did, how do I know?" As his testimony went on, he seemed to withdraw, biting his lip. His voice became so slurred that the court reporter had trouble taking down his testimony. Meyers told the jury that all he remembered was taking amphetamines and drinking for 2 days before he met Voas. One newspaper account describes the rest of the trial as mostly a cat and mouse game over the defendant's alleged faulty memory and possible motives surrounding the bludgeoning death. According to this account, the prosecutor spent 6 hours trying to get the psychiatrist for the defense to concede the murder might have been premeditated. The state's theory was that the defendant intentionally sought out homosexuals to rob, in the belief that homosexuals were usually reluctant to report crimes because of the risk of public exposure. But the psychiatrist for the defense stuck to his conclusion that the crime was not premeditated and that Meyers, in fact, didn't know that Voas was gay until he made an indecent advance that launched Meyers into a murderous rage. The psychiatrist told the jury that he had concluded that Meyers had assaulted Voas because of an anxiety reaction when he learned that the victim, who he thought was a friend, was a homosexual. In two other stunning disclosures, the psychiatrist said he didn't ask Meyers about the murder details because Meyers seemed uncomfortable with the topic. Finally, the psychiatrist told the court that Meyers admitted his motive for tying Voas up and taking his belongings was to teach Voas a lesson. After a fairly brief Friday deliberation, Don James Meyers was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life behind bars. In 1975, due to an error in jury instructions, Meyers' previous conviction was thrown out and he was given a retrial. As he had in the previous trial, Meyers' childhood friend Kenneth Evans testified that Meyers had told him he had rolled a queer when he showed up at his house in the victim's car. In this retrial, Meyers took the stand and the prosecution played a 45-minute recording of an interview with Meyers. In it, the jury heard Meyers tell the police 2 different stories. The first one is that Voas had dropped him off and that was the last time he saw him. Then he circled back, telling the police that he was with Voas until Voas made a homosexual advance, and Meyers had slugged him 3 times, took the victim's car, and fled. Before he left the stand, the prosecutor got Meyers to admit that he had been lying to the police. After a 1-week retrial, on November 5th, 1975, Meyers was again convicted of first-degree murder. On November 24th or 25th, 1975, Meyers was sentenced once again to life in prison. Hollis Voas was born in 1916 in Iowa. He served as a staff sergeant in the Air Force in World War II. He worked as a junior high school teacher in Santa Monica until his murder. As with many of these cases in this period, there was a fair amount of questions about whether or not Mr. Voas was indeed gay. But I would contend that it doesn't matter. In this case, as in other cases like it, homophobia is and was the propelling danger that no one is safe from. Hollis Voas served his country, educated its children, and was brutally murdered, to quote the trial testimony, because someone who thought he was a friend found out he was a homosexual. I wanted to say before I close, one of the things that I've discovered in searching out these older, hidden, mostly unknown cases and their victims is another reason why the homosexual panic defense began to rise as a rationale in courts around the United States. In this time period, accounts of attacks against gay men became so notorious and written about in newspapers that activists and some politicians called it an epidemic of rolling a queer. Things got so bad that a few Democrats and Republicans got together in order to eke out some minor legislation that would offer protections for lesbians and gays. It failed, of course, and the attacks continued at pace. Around the same time, defense lawyers began to use the defense of homosexual panic. After all, a young man defending himself from the advances of a predatory homosexual made for a much more likable defendant than a predatory young criminal out for fun and profit. I'll continue to explore the mostly hidden cases and their forgotten victims. In the meantime, please join me in loving memory of Hollis Voas. Please share and subscribe to the channel.